Are mermaids real, or are they simply figments of our overactive and sometimes lonely imaginations? In the first part of this two-part series, we'll explore stories and eyewitness accounts throughout the ages. Let's begin in the way back. Way back. One of the earliest documentations of a fish person comes during the classical antiquity time period, or 7 to 8,000 BC. Atargatis is a goddess of Syrian origin whose worship spread through Greece and Rome and further. She is a great mother and fertility goddess of the earth and water, considered the main goddess worshipped in Syria. She is often described as the mermaid goddess and is pictured as such, though she was also pictured with legs on many occasions. This, of course, falls into the category of myth. Did she actually exist? Were there first-hand accounts of her ruling? Do you think myths are merely stories, or is it possible they were created with some hints of history? I suppose that's for you to decide. Fast forward a few thousand years to the 5th century AD. In the book Physiologus, written and compiled in Greek by an unknown author, there is a portion dedicated to the nature of the mermaid. This reads much like a warning, as if the writer knew of what they spoke. The following is an excerpt. In the sea there are many marvels. The mermaid is like a maiden. In breast and body she is thus joined. From the navel downward she is not like a maid, but a fish very certainly with sprouted fins. This marvel dwells in an unstable place where the water subsides. She sinks ships and causes suffering. She sings sweetly, this siren, and has many voices, many and resonant, but they are very dangerous. Well, that certainly sounds like a descriptive warning. The writing continues on to tell of havoc the mermaids wreak on unsuspecting sailors. Continuing forward to 1493. That's right, it's good old Chris Columbus. Just prior to his infamous voyages to find stuff and things, he chose to include the most intriguing entry to his diary. Quote, "The day before, when the admiral was going to the Rio del Oro, he said he saw 3 mermaids who came quite high out of the water, but were not as pretty as they are depicted, for somehow, in the face, they looked like men." As you've probably already been told, the accepted answer to this was manatees. Manatees, though cute, have faces that more resemble a puppy than any human I have ever come in contact with. If you look like a manatee, I am very sorry. And although there was no mention of hair in his journal entry, manatees are always bald. There are no species with long flowing hair. And one final problem with the manatee hypothesis: they didn't and don't exist in the area this admiral spotted them. So why did he choose to write about it at all? Why would he have not just written down he had discovered a new species of a large fish? Why would he simply believe his admiral? Were they overly tired, hungry, not able to reason? There are so many questions left unanswered. Again, we jump forward in time to 1608. Dearest explorer Henry Hudson, whom the Hudson River, the Hudson Strait, and the Hudson Bay were named after, had the strangest visitors when searching for a northwest passage near Norway in June of 1608. He recorded in a private log, quote, "This morning one of our company looking overboard saw a mermaid, and calling up some of the company to see her, one more came up, and by that time she was close to the ship's side looking earnestly upon the men. A little after a sea came up and overturned her. From the navel upward her back and breasts were like woman's, her body as big as one of us, her skin very white, with long black hair hanging down her back. When the mermaid finally went down under the waves, her tail was observed, which was that of a porpoise and speckled like a mackerel." Well, now that was some creative writing. I suppose being out at sea for extended periods of time would make you long for the likeness of a woman, but do we assume that all members of a ship hallucinated simultaneously from their lack of lady love? I think we need some more proof. We've transported now into 1830 Scotland. Technically, this story was first written down in the early 1900s and published in one of the town's newspapers. The story reads, quote, "Some 70 years ago, people were cutting seaweed in Bimbecula. Before putting on her stockings, one of the women went to the lower end of the reef to wash her feet. While doing so, she heard a splash in the calm sea, and looking up, she saw a creature in the form of a woman in miniature, some a few feet away. Alarmed, the woman called to her friends, and all the present people rushed to the place. The creature made some somersaults and turned about in various directions. Some men waded into the water to seize her, but she moved beyond their reach. Some boys threw stones at her, one of which struck her in the back. A few days afterwards, this strange creature was found dead nearly 2 miles away. The upper portion of the creature was about the size of a well-fed child of 3 or 4 years of age, with an abnormally developed set of breasts. The hair was long, dark, and glossy, while the skin was white, soft, and tender. The lower part of the body was like a salmon, but without scales. Crowds of people, some from very long distances, came to see this strange animal, and all were unanimous in the opinion that they had gazed upon a mermaid at last. Mr. Duncan Shaw, the sheriff of the district, ordered a coffin and a shroud to be made for the mermaid. This was done, and the body was buried in the presence of many people, a short distance above the shore where she was found. There are still persons living who saw and touched this curious creature, and who gave graphic descriptions of its appearance." End quote. This seems like a very specific account with multiple witnesses. Is it easier to assume the entire village in cahoots to create such a creature, or that she did in fact exist and was murdered? But that's a different story. On to the next account, 1846. So technically before the documentation of the last sighting, but a mere 26 years after the original tale. Enter The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. A short story written contemporaneously with the idea and fear of mermaids. You may have heard that the true story of the Little Mermaid is dark and disturbing. I too simply believe this, as most fairy tales, fables, and myths tend to have hard lessons in order to frighten us into being, and some of them are downright terrifying. Not true for the Little Mermaid. Sure, there are some scary parts, but that's what makes the story interesting. But I digress. I will leave a link to the 12-page PDF so you can decide for yourself. Aside from the strange propaganda surrounding the Little Mermaid, it simply tells of the life of the merpeople, something that was clearly on the minds of folks during the 17th century, before, and to this day. But why? Have we really just made them up? Has the human race in all parts of the world co-created an imaginary being in all the minds of everyone? How did that work? Our final bit of undebunked proof comes in the form of a video from 2012. It's a couple of dudes in Kiryat Yam, Israel, near a beach, and as far as I can find, this video has not yet been debunked, and it's pretty startling and believable. Or is that what I want to believe?
What is that? Oh my God! What is that?
There you have a very brief history of mermaid sightings that, as eyewitness accounts in a time before pics or it didn't happen, are at the very least hard to explain. Speaking of pictures, after quickly sailing through the time of pics or it didn't happen to literally everything has been photoshopped or edited in some way, stay tuned for Mermaids Part 2, The Fake, where I show you some of the most convincing but sadly fictitious images of mermaids in our current age of technology. Until then, stay curious, do your own research, and keep an open mind.